Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Marwell, and I am very proud to be the director of the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. I welcome you to the museum this evening and to this commemoration of the centenary of the Armenian Genocide. There are many reasons why we, a Jewish institution, decided to hold this commemoration, not the least of which is the deep resonance we feel when we reflect on the fate of so many innocents who were so brutally murdered a century ago. The genocide that took place in the second decade of the last century was connected in some fundamental way with the history that is the subject of this museum. While it is dangerous to make historical comparisons, it is indisputable that there are profound links between that history and ours. What happened to the Armenians is not only a matter of concern for Armenians, but is also of vital importance to any citizen of the world, and perhaps especially to Jews. Another reason why we are holding this commemoration is intimately connected to the name that stands above the entrance to this building. The longtime chairman and now chairman emeritus of our museum, Robert M. Morgenthau, was raised with his grandfather's sterling example of speaking truth about injustice, of shining light onto the dark actions of evil men. That example set a course for Robert M. Morgenthau that defined his life's work and led to so many good works, including the creation of this museum. There could perhaps be no more fitting venue for this commemoration, no better confluence of history, family, faith, and community. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in the course of the next hour or so to remember, to reflect, and to learn. Thank you very much.
Good evening, and thank you all for joining us tonight. An interfaith service is an appropriate setting to remind ourselves that as human beings, we share certain basic rights. Freedom of religion is one. As the founding fathers declared, others include life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But there is yet one more right, equally important, that we must never forget: the right to self-determination. This year, the Centennial of the Armenian Genocide has brought an unprecedented level of awareness of the slaughter and deportation of the Armenians. What is less well known, but what has consumed my grandfather equally, is the sad history of the betrayal of the Armenian people in the quest for self-determination. Throughout their history, the Armenians showed great courage in resisting dominance by invading armies, the rebellion in Zaitan, the defense of Van, and of course the historic resistance of the Armenians of Musa Dagh. Each displayed the determination of a proud people, indomitable in spirit and unwilling to surrender their faith or their identity. Yet each time, Ottoman leaders used overwhelming force that escalated to all-out genocide. In response, President Woodrow Wilson firmly committed the policy of the United States to the establishment of an Armenian homeland. This flowed from his 14 points one of which was the principle of the self-determination of the peoples in the former Ottoman Empire. The President appointed a commission, the King Crane Commission, to set forth specific proposals to manifest these basic principles. In August of 1919, the Commission concluded that the Armenians should inhabit a homeland that restored losses from the atrocities suffered periodically at the hands of the Ottoman Turks from 1894 through 1916. The homeland would comprise the Armenian highlands, Turkey and Russia, with an outlet to the Black Sea. In August of 1920, Western powers and the Ottoman Empire signed the Treaty of Sèvres. It too affirmed the principle of an Armenian homeland, although a homeland reduced in size from what Woodrow Wilson had envisioned. But the ink had hardly dried on the treaty when the new Turkish state attacked the Democratic Republic of Armenia and occupied parts of its territory. Soon, the Soviet Union followed suit and absorbed the remaining portion. This land grab, as soon after the genocide of the Armenians, presented a challenge to the conscience of the world, particularly when a German periodical published the comment of the notorious Enver Pasha. "What do you think? Did we slaughter them just for fun?" The response of the world community in that crisis was nothing short of shameful. It was a disgrace. The League of Nations capitulated. Soon there was a new treaty, the Treaty of Lausanne, which made no mention whatsoever of an Armenian homeland. This explains why, for 80 years, Armenians suffered under Soviet oppression. It is why, for 80 years, the Armenian people, who prided themselves on being the world's first Christian nation, were ruled by an atheist dictatorship. Today, of course, the Soviet Union is no more, and Eastern Armenia is an independent republic. And yet, as Armenians and their supporters all around the world marched this year for the genocide recognition, they did so under a twofold phrase: I remember and I demand. I leave it to others to untangle the fiercely competitive and complicated question of how to make right the injustice of history. But let us begin by squarely confronting that history. During the genocide, my grandfather witnessed firsthand what happens when the world's conscience gives way to caution. He was personally devastated by what he famously termed a campaign of race extermination. And the aftermath of that tragedy, his greatest disappointment was that he did not live to see the reestablishment of an independent Armenia. I have said on other occasions that the principles that have largely animated my own life in public office are those that my grandfather brought back from his service in Anatolia. I recommend them to one and all. Among those values are all of the freedoms that would later be included in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But there is yet one more value that he taught us, one that gives life to all the rest: a commitment on issues of justice we shall never give up. Thank you all for coming.
Morgenthau came to Constantinople and found himself in a very different kind of culture than anything he was used to. When he arrives, the Turkish officials at the embassy want to immediately know all the details about his mistress or mistresses. And the new ambassador says, well, I have none. They don't believe him. And he said, you can check all you want. You'll find I have no mistresses. And they're shocked.
My first impression of the famous old capital of Asia and Europe was of a moving sea of silk hats. The station platform seemed populated entirely with frock-coated gentlemen buried under these chimney-like black headpieces. After some confusion, human personalities began to emerge from under them. Henry Morgenthau Sr.
Constantinople was a dynamic urban center, a crossroads between East and West, a place of the mingling of many cultures.
It's one of these strange corners of history where there's an island and the storm is just offshore. And Constantinople was the island to be on. Constantinople in 1913 was really on the knife edge of history.
Turkey ended up on the eve of World War I as a much more militaristic, authoritarian society that had just made a military alliance with another quite militaristic society, Germany. Because the U.S. was neutral until 1917, the ambassador remained neutral. He was part of the U.S. Foreign Service and State Department, and he was an observer. He remained alarmed at the German iron claw over Turkey. And then, of course, something that he had not imagined erupted by the beginning of 1915. And that was the policy to exterminate the largest Christian minority population in Turkey, the Armenians.
The Ottomans wanted a homogeneous Turkic Muslim state which could survive in coming decades and centuries. Armenian deportation's purpose was the annihilation of the entire population, and it was organized in different ways. One major way was to establish special units called Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa, and they attacked Armenian convoys and they massacred them.
We forget often that the idea of using the railway for a genocidal plan began in Turkey in 1915. They deported thousands of Armenians from the western part of Turkey. They also made the Armenian deportees pay for their passage on the railway. This is true in the Nazi case as well, where people are being told it's a wartime security measure, you'll be returning to your homes after the war. And of course, these were absolute lies.
The reports all came back and they built with their own momentum that something is amiss. There were disappearances, there were deportations, and then only later are there just piles and piles of bodies.
When Morgenthau learned first time about the atrocities, he asked the consuls and the other Americans in the region to report whatever they see and in a precise manner. American consuls made the tours outside the cities, and they saw the victims of the genocide. At Lake Gölcük, the number of Armenians killed was around 10,000, and the American consul saw with his own eyes the bodies and reported to Istanbul.
It is absurd for the Turkish government to assert that it ever seriously intended to deport the Armenians to new homes. The treatment which was given the convoys clearly shows that extermination was the real purpose. Henry Morgenthau, Sr.
We get extraordinary reports from Aleppo, and Aleppo was just a nightmarish center of death, because this was part of the terrain of the final destination. I liken it to a kind of Auschwitz of the Armenian Genocide, the Syrian desert, where between 400 and 450,000 people perished.
So, okay, he goes to see the interior minister, Talat Pasha. They had a certain rapport. And Morgenthau says, this is a moral outrage. This is mass murder.
Why are you so interested in the Armenians anyway, he said. You are a Jew. These people are Christians. The Mohammedans and the Jews always get on harmoniously. What have you to complain of? Why can't you let us do with these Christians as we please? You don't seem to realize, I replied, that I am not here as a Jew, but as an American ambassador. My country contains something more than 97 million Christians and something less than 3 million Jews. So, at least in my ambassadorial capacity, I am 97% Christian. But, after all, that is not the point. I do not appeal to you in the name of any race or any religion, but merely as a human being. Henry Morgenthau, Sr.
Morgenthau tried to prevent deportation and killings, especially by pressuring the German ambassador Wangenheim. But Wangenheim never cooperated with Morgenthau, and this is the reason why Morgenthau later accused Wangenheim and the German as being the part of deportation and killing process.
For centuries, the Turks have ill-treated their Armenians and all their other subject peoples with inconceivable barbarity. Yet their methods have always been crude, clumsy, and unscientific. They have understood the uses of murder, but not of murder as a fine art. This new conception was that of deportation. The all-important point is that the act of deporting people en masse is, in modern times, exclusively Germanic.
The prescience of Henry Morgenthau Sr. about the German penchant for Holocaust is just unbelievable. I cannot explain it, but I say it's beyond an analogy. It's beyond what Hitler said, who speaks of the Armenians today. It is almost a foretelling, and it comes in his talk of the Germans in 1915 able to see a solution to a dissident minority by eliminating it. The idea of genocide and final solutions did not come with Hitler, according to Morgenthau. It was in the German DNA, in the culture, way before. That's really the parallel. The Germans were thinking in terms of rearranging the map, the ethnic map of Europe, according to race and to ethnicity, way before the Holocaust. And the Jews were really the ones who got it in the end, that the Armenians were really first.
Approximately around 1 million Armenians perished or massacred, killed during Armenian Genocide.
The ambassador tried everything he could to get the government to intervene. He approached the secretaries of state, first William Jennings Bryan and then Robert Lansing. He approached President Wilson, and he was rebuffed. The U.S. felt it wasn't within its policy or power to intervene. He became a persona non grata, both with the Turkish ruling elite and with the U.S. government. And finally, he's asked to step down from his post.
When he comes back to the States, he comes back in defeat. On a political level, he had to leave his post when he was told, you have broken ranks, you cannot speak out like this. And then he decides to place a bet. All that he knows about the death of the Armenians, he will tell in America, in New York, with the help of his friend Adolf Hawks of the New York Times. He becomes known as Ambassador Morgenthau, champion of the Armenians. He becomes, in the truest sense, an ambassador. It comes at a great cost. His career essentially is over. He's not going to rise to greater things within government. And although it's too little too late, he has an extraordinary moral fortitude that he did not have when he left New York.
Mr. Morgenthau, Your Holiness and Your Eminence, Reverend clergy, especially Rabbi Sobel, and my friend, the great orator and minister of Abyssinian Church, Reverend Batz. I'm here in many ways to pay tribute to three individuals. Morgenthau family, one of them. Second, Raphael Lemkin. Third one, Franz Werfel. And then, of course, all the righteous people who have helped Armenians for the past century without asking any recognition. It was Henry Morgenthau, as you saw, the US ambassador to Ottoman Empire from 1913 to 1916, was the first one to alert the world that Turkish authorities had issued death warrant against the whole race, Armenians. I'm confident that the whole history of the human race contains no such horrible episode as this, he wrote. The great massacres and persecutions of the past seem almost insignificant when compared with the sufferings of the Armenian race in 1915. He wrote, this genocidal act, is my words, not his, should not surpass the most bastardly and beastly and diabolical cruelties ever before perpetrated or imagined in the history of mankind. The impact of Morgenthau and his memoirs were electrifying because it generated tremendous reaction in the United States. The first one was, of course, Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt was furious, and from 1915 to 1918, he advocated that because of deportations of Belgians by Germans and massacres of Armenians by the Ottoman Turks, the United States must declare war against both Germany and Ottoman Empire. This is long before Lusitania or anything in 1915. Armenian massacres, he wrote, Roosevelt, was the greatest crime of the war, and failure to act against Turkey is to condone it. Failure to deal radically with the Turkish horror means that all talk of guaranteeing the future peace of the world is a mere nonsense. When we refuse to war with Turkey, we should take our most important thing, that we should take back what we have said, that maybe we want to make the world safe for democracy. That is not insincere claptrap. The perpetrators of Turkish rule, to perpetuate the perpetuation of Turkish rule is perpetuation of infamy, he wrote. But thanks to Morgenthau, something else happened. There was a struggle between Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. Was prevailed upon not to declare war against the Ottoman Empire in 1917 because there was so much missionary investments in Turkey, Roberts College and others, they would have lost all their investments. And TR wrote that most hypocritical thing I've ever heard, that missionaries are saying somebody should be there when they're massacred in order to help the victims of the massacre. Well, in 1917, there was coalescence of opinion that Armenians should be helped. But thanks to Morgenthau, something else happened, and it was not mentioned in the film. He appealed to his friends, Vartan and others, and they formed, and Rabbi also, Stephen Wise and others, they formed an ecumenical group of individuals, Catholics, Cardinals, Baptists, and everyone, a kind of bipartisan, nonpartisan group that launched a campaign for $10 million to help the Armenians and other Assyrians and others who were subjects of genocide or massacres. That fund became $100 million. It was the largest philanthropic act in the world and largest in United States history by that time. That was also owed to Morgenthau. In his history of genocide, Holocaust, as well as Holocaust, Helen Fine quotes Churchill, who described the Holocaust as a crime without a name. Similarly, the case was for Armenians, the massacres and genocide, there was no name for genocide. The person who coined the term for genocide was Raphael Lemkin, an international lawyer born in Poland of Jewish background. He witnessed all of these happenings and coined the term, and hence the Armenian genocide described as the first genocide of the 20th century. And Holocaust also was coined after World War II because that also had never happened in the history of the world. That entire race was guilty. At least in the case of Armenians, they allowed if you convert to Islam, you would be saved. In the case of Jews, conversion even did not help because it was the race that had to be eliminated, not the religion. Well, then comes, of course, the other person, Franz Werfel, whom I read in Armenian in Tabriz when I was a student, in 40 Days of Musadag. I had not realized that 40 Days of Musadag is not only about Armenians, but symbolically it was warning against Jews, to the Jews. The book was published in 1933, when Hitler came to power. The book was burned. The book was well read by almost all the Jews in Germany and Austria. Because 40 was 40, biblical 40, Musa was Moses, Dag was mountain, and trials and tribulations. And then there is a telling passage in 40 Days of Musadag. I get, even now, very upset reading about it, because it says Lepsius was German missionary asking Enver, why are you doing this? Why don't you let them go? You don't have to massacre. And Enver says the following, quote, don't tell me when you Germans have a similar historical opportunity, you will not get rid of your own undesirable minorities, such as Jews, Gypsies, Slavs, and others. And when Lepsius says we cannot do it, he quotes, guess who? Hitler's word, without saying it's Hitler's. He said, you have no will to power, I pity you. Exactly what Hitler had said. Anyway, so Franz Werfel is the first one who gave this important work, a literary witness, conscience of European literature about Armenian genocide. And then it was my pleasure and honor in 1976 anonymously help transfer the remains of Franz Werfel to Vienna, where he still is, because he died in 1945 in Los Angeles. He remained there till 1976. It was very important to see when the actor whom we had retained read this passage from 40 Days of Musadag, everybody in the audience was crying because that was a warning. And when I read about this, I also realized that during Warsaw Uprising, all the Jews who were in the underground had read 40 Days of Musadag because they said, we don't want to be slaughtered like sheep. Well, I had closed this chapter when a couple of weeks ago, I found two documents which I had not seen before. Now we're coming from 1915 to 1918. May 24th, 1918. Talat Pasha, the architect of Armenian Genocide, wrote the following to Eastern Front, Vehib Pasha, the head of Ottoman forces in Transcaucasus. I'm absolutely not in favor of Armenian establishing government. A small Armenian autonomous government will within 5 years later become a 5 million Armenian state. It will dominate the Caucasus and it will become the Bulgaria of the East. All the Armenians in Iran and America will gather there, and they will get every form of aid from English and French, which did not get it. And in the future, they will move against us with Christian Georgians and with great ease with the Iranians. Therefore, and this is what shocked me, therefore, if possible, the best thing would be to lance the boil. Since it is not possible, it is necessary that Armenia be formed as an extremely weak and unlivable form. Well, this is 1918, because there were some Armenians still left. He wrote also, Jevi Pasha, Enver Pasha wrote the same thing. He said, consequently, in order to remove the disjuncture of Armenians' formation, even smallest Armenian government must be prevented. Land from the Muslims must not be given to Armenians. Either I prefer that the Muslims occupy provinces, including Yerevan. Now, not only Armenian race was to be eliminated, but no hope of Armenians accomplishing what Wilson and the world had promised, including Teddy Roosevelt, who was the first one advocated for independent Armenia 2-3 years before Wilson and subsequently. So, Mr. Morgenthau, I'd like to thank you, your family. I'd like to thank Franz Werfel. He had no family left. They were all massacred. I'd like to thank also Lemkin. He had no family left either. But all of them are remembered by Armenians throughout the world. And several days ago, they were all honored in Washington by the entire Armenian population. It honored all the Muslims who had served Armenians. It honored all the faiths, because this was not an issue of religion. This was an issue of exterminating an alien race, which had been there long before Turks came, thousands of years. 2,500 years, Armenians have been there before Christ, and now almost 4,000, 5,000 years old ancestral land. But contrary to what Enver wanted, Talat wanted, Armenians have refused to die. And like the ghetto, Warsaw ghetto people, they refuse to die like sheep. They like to live like people, they like to live free, and they like to have future as both men and women, but also as an ethnic and religious as well as cultural identity. So thank you, Mr. Morgenthau, and thanks to Ms. Kaliko for organizing this, and thanks for all the brethren and sisters of faith who are here to celebrate human endurance of humanity and brotherhood and sisterhood, which should transcend all hatred, especially after 1 century. So Armenian genocide victims now are martyred. We don't mourn them anymore. We celebrate them for the faith and tenacity of Armenian nation. Thank you very much.
Robert, by God, you are our hero. You have been, you are, and you shall forever, ever be. We thank you as we thank your father, your grandfather, as we give thanks to your children who in their generation are carrying on the magnificent legacy that was bestowed upon them. Abraham Joshua Heschel, a rabbi who wore the mantle of biblical prophecy with grace, with dignity, with courage, and arguably one of the greatest Jewish thinkers of the 20th century, insisted in essay after essay that a true sanctuary, whether that sanctuary sits in the middle of the world of Islam, the center of Christendom, or in the heart of Judaism, a true sanctuary can have no walls. That faith, so critical to the religious experience, can only be found in the inner recesses of human soul, but it has to be a soul that is aflame with a passion for justice and simultaneously a flame that rises up with indignation before injustice. The human soul. A little story about the human soul, and I turn, Vartan, to you, a friend of many decades. The occasion was about 35 years ago. You came to my office, a space now occupied by Rabbi Joshua Davidson, who is among us tonight. And I have long forgotten what it was that caused us to be together, what the agenda was. But I remember, Vartan, as if it were yesterday, that after we concluded whatever it was we were talking about, we turned to the Armenian Genocide and the Jewish Holocaust. And during that conversation, I did, Vartan, most of the listening. And you quoted Deuteronomy, Zachor. We must never, ever forget. And we got up, we were sitting very close to each other. And as I was walking you to the door, you turned around and with that very strong grip that is your hand, you placed it upon my shoulder and you said, Ronald, we are soul brothers. We are soul brothers, you said, because we share similar memories and a common pain. And again, you said, we must never forget. We were looking directly into each other's eyes. And in response, I said to you, Vartan, the theologies of your faith community and the theologies of my faith community are different, but those differences pale before what God implanted deep within the human heart. An ability to feel pain and an ability to judge and say it must not be, as Calvin reminded us. And that in that human heart, there is a common humanity, a shared divinity, and a mutual sorrow. And so, dear friends and beloved boss, with that affirmation, our common humanity, our shared divinity, and the promise to the world and a promise to ourselves and a promise to our children and our grandchildren, we shall never forget. And with that affirmation, it is our honor now to call to the podium His Eminence Archbishop Barsamian, someone whom I've known for many, many years as well, scholar, shepherd, and leader of the largest diocese in the Armenian diaspora.
Your Holiness, Your Excellencies, Reverend brothers and sisters from the interfaith community, distinguished guests, and very dear friends, I want to express my deep thanks and appreciation to the Museum of Jewish Heritage for organizing this wonderful event of commemoration and celebration. It's a great privilege for me to introduce to you His Holiness, the Catholicos of all Armenians, who has come to the United States in order to attend the special commemorative events in the capital of our nation, in Washington. And also, it's so wonderful that His Holiness was able or is able to be here this evening. And also, I thank the director, Dr. David Martwell, for hosting this important gathering. And I greet Carnegie Foundation President, Dr. Vartan Gregorian, and the great Robert Morgenthau, a remarkable friend of the Armenians or the Armenian people, and a public servant of an unequaled stature in this great city of New York. I am also very grateful to Peter Kaliko for his generous sponsorship this evening, and God bless you all. For the past several months, I have been amazed to see the incredible outpouring of support for the recognition of the Armenian Genocide, which has come from all quarters of the world. It's a sign to me that the events of 100 years ago are still relevant to our world today, perhaps more relevant today than they have ever been in the past. The year 1915 was a time of suffering and turmoil for the entire world. It was a time of global war when the new technologies of the machine age were turned against human beings. For the Armenian people, it marked the start of our greatest catastrophe. The Ottoman Empire's campaign of annihilation would leave 1.5 million innocent Armenians slaughtered. The monuments of a centuries-old civilization in ruins. Armenian villages depopulated, and remains of a once vital Armenian presence scattered across the globe. It took decades before the right word could be created to even describe those events. The word genocide, conceived, as Dr. Gregorian reminded us, by Raphael Lemkin, to warn us of the horrifying destructive potential of the modern state, and to warn against its use in the future. Even today, there are some in the world who deny the terrible realities of 1915. But the truth could not be so easily erased. It was preserved by the descendants of the fallen and transmitted to the future through the powerful testimony of the witnesses. Great figures like Ambassador Henry Morgenthau, a righteous witness before history, before humankind, and indeed before God. It's painful to reflect that after the Armenians, it was the fallen countrymen, fellow countrymen, Ambassador Morgenthau and Dr. Lemkin, who were the next to suffer as the targets of genocide in the Holocaust that consumed 6 million Jewish lives during the Second World War. Ironically, it is often the very experience of affliction that draws people together. Tragedy strips away the outer differences and reveals the vulnerable human condition common to us all without discrimination. And so, we stand together this evening, Armenians, Jewish, anyone, Cambodians, and many others, as survivors of the genocide, to bear witness to the past, but also to speak out for the present and indeed for the future. Most important of all, however, our common humanity, as the rabbi indicated, is best shown not in the tragedy itself, but in our miraculous response to that tragedy. The spirit of compassion knows no human boundaries. To me, that is the greatest meaning of the Armenian Genocide Centennial, exemplified in this beautiful gathering this evening. It is an opportunity to come together, to show our loving concern for one another, and confirm our solidarity with all others who have suffered and who are still suffering today. Tonight, this evening, I ask for God's blessings on all those who endured the mass tragedies of the past 100 years, those who fell victim to violence, as well as those who bravely bore witness to it. Let their testimony, written in blood and tears, no less than in words, stand as an everlasting reminder to the world, diverting humankind from the path of destruction and onto the path of justice, mercy, and indeed peace. Let me conclude by introducing the Supreme Patriarch and Catholicos of all Armenians, His Holiness Karakin II. In a spirit of fatherly love and a spiritual friendship, His Holiness has journeyed from Armenia to lead our community tributes to the Genocide Centennial. And now, it is my great privilege to introduce His Holiness Karakin II, the Supreme Patriarch and the Catholicos of all Armenians.
Dear ones, brothers and sisters, I am grateful to be with you this evening in this beautiful setting among friends and supporters to bring you blessings from the Mother See of Holy Echmiadzin. I extend my gratitude to the Museum of Jewish Heritage. For the Armenian people, our commemoration this year had its roots in a painful tragedy from a century ago. The losses we suffered in the genocide are impossible to calculate. In terms of the loss of human life, the destruction of our civilization and churches, and our exile from the greater part of the ancient Armenian homeland. But through the valley of the shadow of death, a ray of light could be seen in the expression of concern, solidarity, and brotherhood that others showed for us. One figure holds a special place among these friends of the Armenian people: Ambassador Henry Morgenthau, the man of deep principle and moral courage, who boldly raised his voice to help our people in our darkest hour. I want you to know that just a few weeks ago, at the Genocide Museum in Armenia, a special room was dedicated in Ambassador Morgenthau's name to honor his immortal memory and the great place he holds in our national history. And I am proud to see that in this Museum of Jewish Heritage, the sons of the Morgenthau family, whom I have the pleasure to know, are continuing the great legacy of their blessed ancestors. Thank you, Mr. Robert Morgenthau. Indeed, the Jewish and Armenian people have been tied together through bonds of common experience and shared suffering, but also through bonds of common aspiration and shared faith in God. And I feel that our destiny is to continue to walk together through history as witnesses, bringing the light of truth to the rest of the world. For that reason, I am deeply honored by your expressions of goodwill, friendship, and recognition tonight. And in return, I offer my gratitude to you and my deep admiration for this museum and for the great undying heritage it represents. I convey my prayers for peace, justice, and brotherhood for all God's children, today and always. Amen.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.